Greetings and welcome to Scriptures Unlocked. In this presentation, I'll be focusing on the book of Daniel, in particular, Daniel chapter 3. And I've entitled this presentation as Death Decree over Worship. So it's entitled Death Decree over Worship. So in the previous presentation, we looked at God laying out the future kingdoms that would rule the world to Nebuchadnezzar in a dream. And he saw an image consisting of different metals: gold, silver, bronze, and iron. And here's a picture of Daniel explaining to Nebuchadnezzar the meaning of his dream. So in Daniel 2, verse 31 to 35, this was the king's dream. And this is Daniel explaining to the king what he saw. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. The image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So this was what Nebuchadnezzar saw. He saw the image's head made of gold, and that represented Babylon. The chest and the arms of silver represented the Medo-Persian Empire. The belly and thighs of brass represented Greece, and the legs of iron represented Rome, and then he had the feet of part iron and part clay. He also saw a stone, which is the image on the right, smiting the image at its feet, that crumbled the entire kingdoms of the world. And then that stone became a great mountain. That stone is represented by Jesus' everlasting kingdom. So this is the interpretation that Daniel gave the king. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. So Daniel made it very clear that it was God Almighty who gave Nebuchadnezzar his power, his strength, and indeed his kingdom. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he, God, given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. And then Daniel told him, thou art this head of gold. So Daniel told Nebuchadnezzar that he was the head of gold, an idea the king clearly liked. However, the view that his golden city would be conquered someday did not sit very well with Nebuchadnezzar, because Babylon was thought to be impregnable. Nebuchadnezzar was told that after thee shall arise another kingdom, Daniel 2:39, inferior to thee, which was speaking about the Medes and the Persians, and another third kingdom of brass, which is represented by Greece, which shall be a rule over all the earth. So these kingdoms would rule the world. Babylon first, Medo-Persia would follow, and then Greece would rule the entire world. And then the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things. And as the iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. So this fourth kingdom was Rome. So Nebuchadnezzar was clearly not content with having any other kingdoms succeeding Babylon as the dominant world power. Therefore, since the head of gold represented him specifically, and by extension Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, in an act of open defiance to God's prophetic outline, decided to make an image of gold from head to toe. And this takes us to our chapter under review, Daniel chapter 3, the king's golden image. Nebuchadnezzar the king made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits, and the breadth thereof 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. So the dimensions of the image was 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, which means that this golden image was very colossal, standing at 90 feet tall and 9 feet wide. And here is a picture of the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar set up. This image was built as a monument to Nebuchadnezzar's pride, as well as a dedication to the gods of Babylon. Hence, the significance of the measurement used to construct the golden image the king had set up. Viewers, the Babylonians used the sexagesimal number system with 60 as its base. And it's from this system that we today have derived 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, as well as 360 degrees in a circle. That is 60 times 6, which gives us 360. Nebuchadnezzar saw himself as the supreme ruler over all. So he gathered together all the Babylonian elites. And this is what we are told in Daniel 3, verse 2. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king sent together the princes, the governors, and the captains, the judges, the treasurers, the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Then the princes, the governors, and captains, the judges, the treasurers, and the counselors, the sheriffs, and all the rulers of the provinces were gathered together unto the dedication of the image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So notice the emphasis is being placed on the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So all the political movers and shakers within the kingdom of Babylon were present to pledge their fealty to Nebuchadnezzar. And notice what happened. Then an herald cried aloud, saying, to you it is commanded, O people, nations, and languages, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, the flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye shall fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king hath set up. And whoso falleth not down and worship it shall the same hour be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. So notice the issues at play here, viewers, which will be repeated during the Mark of the Beast crisis. All the people were being coerced to fall down and worship the image under the pain of death. Pride, power, and self-exaltation was at the heart of Nebuchadnezzar's action, because in essence, the people were really falling down and worshiping him, since the image of gold was a representation of himself. Nebuchadnezzar essentially promoted himself to godlike status and desired to be worshipped, the same sin that led to the devil's downfall, because he wanted the one thing that belongs only to God, and that is to be worshipped. And here you can see a picture of the people of Babylon falling down and worshiping the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. However, of all the people that were present in the plain of Dura, only 3 Jewish men, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, whom we know to be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, refused to bow down and worship the golden image set up by Nebuchadnezzar. Many Jews were taken as captives to Babylon in 586 BC when Jerusalem was besieged and destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. But notice, only three Degedege individuals, 3 Degedege Jews did not kowtow to the king's decree. And you can see the image of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego standing tall, refusing to bow down to the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Therefore, at that time, when all the people heard the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and all kinds of music, all the people, the nations, and the languages fell down and worshipped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. Wherefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came near and accused the Jews. They spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree. So it's clear. It was a command to bow down to the golden image. So thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man that shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoso falleth not down and worship it, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fire furnace. Notice what the accusers then said. There are certain Jews whom thou hast set up over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. So clearly, this image is a representation of Nebuchadnezzar. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods. So the image had to do with the gods of Babylon as well. Now worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Here again is a picture of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which are their Babylonian names. So you have Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, their Jewish names, standing tall, standing head and shoulders above all the people in the province of Babylon, refusing to bow down to the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. When Nebuchadnezzar heard that, then Nebuchadnezzar in his rage and fury commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods? There it is again. It had to do with the worship of the gods of Babylon. Do not ye serve my gods, now worship the golden image which I have set up? Viewers, obedience is the highest form of allegiance and worship that we can give to God. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were loyal to God and his commandments, and knew that by bowing down and worshiping the image set up by the king, they would be violating the first and second commandments of God's law. The first and second commandments of the Decalogue states this. Exodus 20 verse 3, the first commandment, Thou shalt have no other gods before me. So no other gods should be placed before the one and true living God. Every single Israelite knew the commandments. So the first commandment states, Thou shalt have no other gods before me. The second commandment says this, Exodus 20 verse 4 to 6. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. So what Nebuchadnezzar did was to make a graven image of a man representing himself. The commandment then says, Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, or in other words, worship them. For I, Jehovah, thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Jesus said, If you love me, keep my commandments. So these Jews knew that to bow down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up would be to violate the second commandment of the Decalogue. And they refused to bow down and worship the golden image because it is a graven image. So in obedience to God and in an act of true worship, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stood their ground. And when it was told that these men dared to defy the king's command, Nebuchadnezzar was enraged. In an attempt to get everyone to submit to his diabolical command, Nebuchadnezzar decided to give these three young men a second chance to see if they would honor him and fall down and worship the golden image. Notice what he said in Daniel 3 verse 15. Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer, and all kinds of music, ye fall down and worship the image which I have made. Well, but if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands? Nebuchadnezzar, viewers, was demanding a public display of total submission to his absolute authority in the kingdom of Babylon, and was using music and threat to gain compliance. And here you see a picture of Nebuchadnezzar giving them a second chance, demanding that they fall down and worship the golden image that he had made. Look at his face. He was angry. He was furious. He was enraged that these three young men dared to defy me, King Nebuchadnezzar. Viewers, Music can have a great influence over an individual's mind and can get persons to do things that they otherwise would not have done, because music can create a soothing environment, a calming atmosphere to persuade. And that was Nebuchadnezzar's intention by using music to get his way. Musical instruments and music play an important role in worship. And since it was not achieving its intended purpose with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the king threatened them with death if they failed to comply. Viewers, God will never force us against our will, because he created sentient beings with the capacity to think and reason, which is precisely why God allows for independence of thought and freedom of choice. Notice what Joshua said to the Israelites in Joshua 24, verse 15. And if it seem evil unto you to serve Jehovah, choose you this day whom ye will serve. So clearly, we have a choice. Choose you this day whom ye will serve, whether the gods of Babylon, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the flood, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land ye dwell. But as for me, Joshua said, and my house, we will serve Jehovah. And that is exactly what Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah decided to do. They decided to serve their God, Jehovah, the only true God. Viewers, forced worship is at the heart of every false religious system, and Babylon was a center of false worship, since the king wanted to establish a one-world government where he dictated who, what, and how the people worshipped. Nebuchadnezzar posed a question that strengthened the resolve of the three Jewish men when he asked, "Who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands?" It was a direct challenge to the power of God Almighty. Nebuchadnezzar's question was reminiscent of what Pharaoh said when he was told by Moses and Aaron to let God's people go. Notice what Pharaoh said in Exodus 5, verse 2. And Pharaoh said, "Who is Jehovah that I should obey his voice to let Israel go? I know not Jehovah, neither will I let Israel go." Pharaoh, as we all know, found out the hard way, because Egypt received 10 plagues, with the final plague being the death of the firstborn, which affected Pharaoh himself because his son and the heir to his throne was killed. The king of Babylon was about to see the God that can deliver out of his hands, because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were men of conviction who would not compromise their faith, even in the face of death. Nebuchadnezzar threw down the proverbial gauntlet, but pay attention to their response. Daniel 3, 16 to 18. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fire furnace, and he will deliver us out of thine hand, O king." So they had faith that their God was able to deliver them. And notice they said, "He will deliver us out of thine hand. But if not, even if he chooses not to deliver us, be it known unto thee, O king, that we will not serve thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up." Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego decided to exercise their faith in the true and living God. They would rather die than disobey God's commandments. So these men willingly chose death before dishonor. We can just imagine how fearful they must have been at the very thought of being thrown alive into the burning fire furnace. But their faith in God, coupled with their courage, enabled them to stand resolute in spite of those fears. Courage, viewers, isn't the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward, or in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's case, stand your ground despite those fears. So notice what transpired after they refused to accept the second chance given to them by Nebuchadnezzar. Then was Nebuchadnezzar full of fury, and the form of his visage was changed against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Therefore he spake and commanded that they should heat the furnace 7 times more than it was wont to be heated. So he told them to turned up the heat to its maximum. And he commanded the most mighty men that were in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to cast them into the burning fire furnace. Then these men were bound in their coats, their hosen, and their hats, and their other garments, and were cast into the midst of the burning fire furnace. Therefore, because the king's commandment was urgent, and the furnace exceeding hot, the flame of the fire slew those men that took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the burning fire furnace. But notice what happened. Instead of being burnt alive, something miraculous happened. Nebuchadnezzar was now perplexed and started to second guess himself. Daniel 3:24 onwards says this. Then Nebuchadnezzar the king was astonished, he was amazed, and rose up in haste, and spake and said unto his counselors, Did not we cast 3 men bound into the midst of the fire? They answered and said unto the king, True, O king. He answered and said, Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt. And the form of the 4th is like the Son of God. Or in other words, he said, and the form of the 4th is like the son of the gods, because they believed in many gods. What Nebuchadnezzar realized was that this 4th figure was a divine being. And he recognized that something miraculous had happened. Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the mouth of the burning fire furnace, and spake and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, ye servants of the Most High God, come forth and come hither. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came forth of the midst of the fire. And here you can see a picture of Nebuchadnezzar looking into the burning fire furnace. And he saw 4 men, the 3 Jewish men, along with the 4th figure. He expected them to be consumed by the flames, because we know that on the right, that the men who threw them into the fire were consumed by the heat of the furnace. But these 3 men were not consumed. And in fact, a 4th person appeared in the midst of the burning fire furnace. Daniel 3 verse 27 says this, And the princes, governors, and captains, and the king's counselors, being gathered together, saw these men upon whose bodies the fire had no power, nor was an hair of their head singed, neither were their coats changed, nor even the smell of fire had passed on them. Viewers, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, came himself to deliver Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego from the flames of the burning fire furnace. And in the process, let Nebuchadnezzar know that their God is able to deliver them. And here you can see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego coming forth out of the midst of the fire furnace. And in the background, you can see the form of the 4th figure. In his pride, Nebuchadnezzar issued a challenge, and God duly answered, because the king of Babylon had clearly forgotten what he said in the previous chapter and needed a reminder. And this is what he said in Daniel 2 verse 47. After Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego explained to him the dream that he had. The king answered unto Daniel and said, Of a truth it is that your God is a God of gods and a Lord of kings and a revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst reveal this secret. That's what he stated in Daniel chapter 2. But by Daniel chapter 3, he had clearly forgotten that Daniel's God, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God, is a God of gods and the Lord of kings. The Bible also tells us in Isaiah 59 verse 1 that, behold, Jehovah's hand is not shortened that it cannot save, neither is ear heavy that it cannot hear. So God heard the challenge that Nebuchadnezzar made when he said, And who is that God that shall be able to deliver you out of my hands? Viewers, Psalm 34 verse 7 says this, The angel of Jehovah encampeth round about them that fear him and delivereth them. And that's exactly what he did. Jesus Christ is the angel of Jehovah. Jesus is the angel of the Lord. God has promised that he will never leave us nor forsake us. God was with Israel at the Red Sea, as well as when they crossed the river Jordan. and he was with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the furnace. Notice what Isaiah 43 verse 2 says. When thou passest through the waters, remember the Red Sea, I will be with thee. The Red Sea parted. They went through the midst of the waters, and through the rivers, they shall not overflow thee. So even though the river Jordan was overflowing its bank, when the children of Israel are going into the land of Canaan, the river Jordan parted, and they went through the river. And when thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned, neither shall the flame kindle upon thee. This was said in Isaiah's days. And years later, it came to pass because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego walked through the flame. They were not burned, and neither was any flame kindled upon them. Not even the smell of smoke was upon their clothes. The fact that Nebuchadnezzar could see inside the burning fire furnace shows his cruelty and sadistic nature, because he clearly took pleasure in seeing his victims being burnt alive. The fact that he could see is a view into the sadistic nature of the king of Babylon. And here are some other instances that shows his sadistic nature. In Jeremiah 39 verse 6 and 7, this is what he did. Then the king of Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, slew the sons of Zedekiah. Zedekiah was the last king of Judah in Riblah before his very eyes. Also the king of Babylon slew all the nobles of Judah. And after he slew the king's sons, the princes, moreover, he put out Zedekiah's eyes, so he blinded him. The last thing he saw was his sons being killed by Nebuchadnezzar, and then his eyes were gouged out. And then he was bound with chains and taken to Babylon. And in Daniel chapter 2, in the previous chapter, Nebuchadnezzar said if the Chaldeans were not able to tell him the dream and give him the interpretation, notice what he said, if ye will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation thereof, ye shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. So Nebuchadnezzar was a very sadistic, a very cruel ruler. Daniel chapter 3 verse 28 says this. So after God delivered Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Nebuchadnezzar spake and said, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who hath sent his angel and delivered his servants that trusted in him, and have changed the king's word, and yielded their bodies that they might not serve nor worship any God except their own God. So viewers, notice that the central issue in Daniel 3 is worship. And the words worship, worshipped, and worshipeth appears a total of 11 times in Daniel chapter 3 alone, because the theme and issue at play in the book of Daniel chapter 3 is worship. Who you worship, what you worship, and how you worship. This incident is a reminder to all believers that when we stand up for God, he can choose to stand with us, as was the case with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Faith, viewers, is a Christian's spiritual muscle, and in order for it to grow, it must be exercised. God will not always intervene in miraculous ways, but whenever his power and divine authority is challenged, he usually does, as was the case in the plain of Dura. God's intervention no doubt brought an abrupt end to Nebuchadnezzar's dedication of his image, because the talk of the town, the talk of the entire kingdom of Babylon, was now going to be about that God who was able to deliver from the burning fire furnace. This miraculous event prompted Nebuchadnezzar to issue another decree, which again shows viewers that the king's attitude towards worship had not changed. Notice what he said in Daniel 3:29. Therefore, I make a decree that every people, nation, and language would speak anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces. There again shows you his cruelty and his sadistic nature. And their houses shall be made a dunghill. Why? Because there is no other God that can deliver after this sort. This decree, viewers, was also wrong. No king nor government has the right or authority to demand or dictate when it comes to the matter of worship. So when the king was now going to make another decree that if anyone says anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they would be punished. It is diabolical. It is not of God. God does not force people to worship. Persons even today have said many things against God. Many persons have blasphemed God. Yes, there are consequences. God is the one that will deal with them. No government or king or kingdom has the authority or power to punish anyone because he says anything against the God of the universe. That is a matter that is entirely within God's own prerogative. He will take action. No government has that right or that authority. So Nebuchadnezzar's decree was again wrong. So no king or government has the authority to legislate or decree who, what, or how an individual chooses to worship. Worship is a very personal and private matter, which ought not to be forced or legislated. Forced worship is anathema to God's kingdom. Daniel 3 ends with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being promoted a second time because of their faith. And Daniel 3:30 says this: Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. And that ends chapter 3 of the book of Daniel. What transpired, viewers, in the plain of Dura on that faithful day will soon be repeated in the last days, because we are now living in the very toenails of the image that Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream in Daniel chapter 2. The theme of Revelation 13, which deals with the mark of the beast, is worship. And the final conflict will be over worship, because everyone will have to make a choice whether they will obey God rather than men. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego chose to obey God Almighty instead of Nebuchadnezzar, who was a mere man. This matter of choice has always been a fundamental issue since the creation of mankind. And that can be seen in the choice that God gave our first parents, Adam and Eve. God told them, you can eat of every tree except the tree of knowledge of good and evil. But they chose to disobey God, and as a result, sin, an unwelcomed intruder into the human family, came into the world. And as a result, we have always been battling whether to obey God or men. So God is all about choices. He doesn't force us to worship him. It's either we accept him or we reject him. God has shown us his love in the golden text of all scriptures. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever, it is a choice, whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. So we can choose to believe in his Son or not. He will not force you to believe in his Son. But know full well that if you reject his Son, you will not have everlasting life, because everlasting life is a gift that is given to those who believe in his Son. And it is inclusive. It says, whosoever. All are invited to accept Jesus Christ as their personal Lord and Savior. But it's a choice that each individual will have to make. God will not force us against our will. In fact, God cannot save us against our will, for that matter. So viewers, God has granted all of us free will, but this freedom of choice is a potential double-edged sword. Free will is our greatest gift as human beings, as well as our biggest quote-unquote curse, simply because we will ultimately be judged by the choices that we make. God does not, and I repeat, God does not and will never force us to worship him. God gives us options, which is precisely why he always used that two-letter word, if, which means you have a choice with regards to how he operates. Therefore, viewers, any government or system that will seek to force people to worship against the dictates of their own conscience is not of God. But this is exactly what will happen in the future, according to Revelation 13, 11 to 17. So this brings us to the end of Daniel chapter 3. The theme of the entire chapter is about worship. This series is about the mark of the beast. I'm gradually taking you through the book of Daniel, and I'll get to Revelation, but I want you to see the issues at play. So the issue here is about forced worship in Daniel chapter 3. All the people in the province of Babylon were coerced under the pain of death to worship the golden image that is over my shoulder. Anyone who did not worship, or anyone with an opposing view, would be cast into the burning fire furnace. 3 individuals, so there's always a remnant. Many Jews were taken captives into Babylon, but only 3 Jewish men remained faithful to their God and his commandments. And in the last days, the same thing will happen. There will be a few who will not receive the mark of the beast. And again, the governments will legislate that we will not be able to buy or sell unless we have the mark of the beast. And many will be caused to be killed because they refuse to accept the mark of the beast, similar to what happened in Daniel chapter 3. So Daniel chapter 3 sets the stage and is a precursor to what is to come when Revelation chapter 13 will be fulfilled, when the mark of the beast crisis is unleashed upon the world. And when that happens, every single individual will have to make a choice. Are you going to honor God? Are you going to be faithful and obey God rather than the laws enacted by the world governments? The choice is yours. The choice is mine. God has told us that whosoever receiveth the mark is destined for the lake of fire. So the choice is ours to remain faithful to our God. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching, and may God continue to bless us as he gives us the courage, like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, to stand our ground, even in the face of death, and uphold the commandments of God. Have yourselves a wonderful day.